Yeah, I forgot to record the first one, and he was very upset with me. So in the way he gets upset, he doesn't. So, but okay. So we're gonna go over, and the way I've done this, Yavni, you've been to a few of these. We're gonna work off the Shulchan Aruch, and because it's really just a review, so it's a Chazara session. So I'm not gonna dive too deeply into what were the machlokot of the Rishonim or anything like that. It's really just kind of the practical takeaways in many ways. That's just the way I've decided to do it. And there's a lot to cover in this one, actually, because we didn't really look at the Shulchan Aruch too deeply in Shir. So we're talking about Chaticha Riyalit Kabed. And so I just actually want to start, before we even dive into Siman Kuf Aleph, with the question of, we're in Tarovot, where we're talking about mixtures here. This is a mixture that has a Chaticha that's Riyalit Kabed, whatever that means. And the question, what kind of mixture are we even talking about at this point? So I just want to throw that out. It's what kind of mixture are we talking about?
I just stopped in, so I could be totally wrong. But aren't we talking about Yavesh B'Yavesh?
We are. Yeah, that's great. So we're starting Yavesh V'Yavesh. We're not talking about the tom of the thing. We're talking about the thing itself. And so, and there's another thing. It's probably, we're talking about, right, Min B'Mino, right? Because if it's not B'Mino and it's Yavesh V'Yavesh, you could probably take it out potentially. And actually almost everyone says that it's Yavesh V'Yavesh. And it is Min B'Mino is the case we're talking about here. And in fact, I don't remember where it was. I think it was somebody, maybe in the Darchei Moshe, somebody on the tour actually made a comment that it was like the same rules apply between Birya and Chaticha Hariyalek Kabed, which general is true, and included Min B'Mino. And then someone else said, well, wait, that can't be the case, because Birya is definitely not a Min B'Mino case. It's not like you have one ant in a 100 ants. Those are all problematic. But in general, we're talking about Yavesh B'Yavesh and Min B'Mino is the way this is taken. So anyway, let's start out. Sorry, go for it.
How do we know that it's Yavesh B'Yavesh Davka?
Well, because right, lach belach, we're usually talking about tam, right? There's no chaticha that you put in front of somebody. We're talking about liquids, and you drop it in, and there's some tam in there, and you have to remove the thing. So birya would actually be, it could be yavesh belach, but here it sounds like we're talking about Yavesh B'Yavesh, also because I saw someone say that, but it's a good, that's really what it comes down to. If I remember correctly, it also comes out of the way the Gemara presents it and the different Gemaras on this. So
right, the Mishnah deals with a case in which one chaticha drops into other chatichot.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the source text.
Yeah. And if anyone has already looked, by the way, at the interesting thing, right, Mino, and the whole question of like, right, there are two different opinions. It's either, Batel Barov in general, at least Deraita, and definitely it is, if it's Yavesh B'Yavesh, it's Batel Barov. But there's the other opinion, I think it's Rabbi Yehuda, who says Min B'Mino is never Batel, right? And we'll see that come back for the Ron's explanation next week, when we, I think I sent it out last night, but when we get to Kuf Bet and the whole question of Yesh Lo Matirin, why is that not Batel?
When Rabbi Yehuda says Min B'Mino is Lo Batel, that's not for Yavesh B'Yavesh though.
It seems, at least from the way the Ron is formulated, it might be.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's quite extreme.
Yeah. So, but.
Okay.
At least if I understood that correctly. So maybe it's Tzrichiyun on my part. So okay, that was a lot, but I want to start out with just the general rule of the Shulchan Aruch. The two things, right? Chaticha Riyalit Kabed, whatever that means. And he says Dino Kibiria, that it's not Batel in Aleph. I'm just going to read here for Seif Aleph. And then he says Ve'afilo, and I'll read this part. Ve'afilo im hi asura behana'ah. Right, kivan she'im titbatel hayta muteret riyalit kabed. Right, he says even if it's something that is an isur hana, right, it still counts as riyalit kabed. Okay, and the whole question is, well, why is that even like a question? He kind of answers it here, but partially. So why would it be the case if something is asur b'hana'ah that you'd think what's the havamina that it wouldn't be riyalit kabed?
Because you wouldn't be putting it in front of a guest. Because right. That would give you pleasure to put it in front of us.
Exactly. It's a sort of, there's like nobody you could give it to. It's versus like you had a nevela is could be really kabed. You could give it to a non-Jew, you could sell it, you could, but and there is an interesting comment of I didn't write down. Oh, it was in the Ber Hatev. So let's take a look at that on Hana'ah. And this is for those who have been here, I like to use the Ber Hatev just because he does like a nice often summary about the Shach and the Taz. And this is the Ber Hatev Kuf Aleph Sif Katan Aleph Behana'ah. Someone want to read? Don't all volunteer at once.
You can do it if you want.
Go for it. Yeah.
בהנאה, כתב השח דמבואר בש"ס דאיסורי הנאה כגון
בשר בחלב.
כגון בשר בחלב, וככה הגבנה, אם הן חתיכה הראויה להתכבד, אוסרין תערובתן גם כן בהנאה. אפילו באלף, ניהו מותר למוכרן לעובד כוכבים חוץ מדמי איסור שבהן.
Great.
Right. So in addition, if it's asur b'hana'ah, then it makes the whole ta'arovet asur b'hana'ah, except that you can sell it to someone as long as you sell it to them for the price that it would be if you hadn't had that chaticha in it.
Exactly.
Like
So that's a great summary, right? The whole thing becomes asur b'hana'ah. However, you could sell it. You could get the hana of the stuff that wasn't the isur out of it, essentially. So, okay, so that's all the basic Sif Aleph, but the Ramah has two nice clauses here about what if it's an isur derabanan and what if it's a safek ruya litgabed. Someone want to read the Haggah on Sif Aleph? We're in the Ramah. So in va'afilu eina asura.
Yeah, I can do that.
Go for it.
Ve'afilu eina asura rak midiroanan eina betila. So the Ramah is informing us that even rabbinic prohibitions can still fall under this category.
Great.
Ve'im hu safek im hi re'uya lichaber olo az lianan lekula afilu hi asura midoraita. And it says, but if there's a doubt as to whether something is ra'ui lichaber, then we're going to go leniently and say it's not. And that includes even for things that might have a biblical prohibition. And the reason for that is because the whole notion of chaticha ra'ui lichaber is rabbinic anyway.
Great, exactly. So this is safek derabanan, and safek derabanan we are lehakel. So good. I'm looking at the time. We're already. So I want to, unless there's like major questions on that, I want to push forward to bet if that's okay. Good. So Sif bet. We're going to see that a condition on what counts as chaticha rialit kabed. Maybe I'll read at the beginning of bet. Right. He says ein ladin chaticha rialit kabed. Ela imken isura machmat atzma. It has to in itself inherently be an isur. Kigon nevela uvasar b'chalav. Right, so milk and meat mixture is nevela. Aval nesra machmat shekiblat ham isur. But if it's like you dropped some some chalev, let's say chalev juice on a piece of meat or something like that, or got cooked with chalev and it absorbed. Well, I don't can go there. You drop some pork juice on some meat. It's even better. That is not inherently of itself. The piece is not inherently isur. It's the thing that it's absorbed. It's the tam velo hayaba shishim levad lo, where it's the case where it can't be it is 60-1. Afilu mishu sever chatichat sman naset nevila. This is the important part. In ladin chaticha rialit kabed. Even if you say I hold chanan, even if you say I drop some pork juice on my nice steak that I'm going to serve to my guests, and that whole steak is now it becomes chanan, it all becomes nevela. Nonetheless, it is not considered if that steak then gets mixed with a bunch of other steaks of the same type, right? It can actually be batel because the steak itself is not a chaticha rialit kabed as an isur. It's not chaticha rialit kabed because it itself was not an isur; it just absorbed isur. So it's I think it's a subtle distinction, and it's important that even in the world that says hanan, you don't get this idea that it can't be batel because it absorbed some asur flavor to it. But is that yes, sorry, say it again, Tikva.
just if we think out the logic of that, why? I mean, it kind of intuitively seems to make sense because it's like a lower level, but if the logic of Khatiha Haruya Lahit Kabed is that it can't be batal because like the piece has too much status, then why would it matter?
Yeah,
For someone who holds none, why wouldn't that still be an issue?
great. I think I saw this somewhere, and someone, but I don't remember it was right now. It was in the Shari Dur, I think. Yeah, here we go. Rashba Run. Yeah, it is. Look at the Shach Dalet. That's where. You want it, Tifa? Do you want to read the Shach Dalet for us?
אין לדין חתיכה ראויה להתכבד. הטעם כתבו
Shari Dura.
שורי דירה, אוקיי, ספר א', והרשב"א והר"ן ושאר פוסקים, משום מכל מקום אין העשר הנבלע בחשיב חתיכה ראויה להתכבד.
Exactly.
Okay, so the isser that's absorbed is not important enough?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So it's like, the pork juice itself was not Riyali Kabed, and therefore it doesn't fall into that status. So even though the steak
Right.
itself is, right, the Isser part of it, shall we say, and this might, I don't know, I haven't gone too far, maybe some people know this better than I, it might be a little bit of the breakdown of Hanan also, right? And you could even say, I think Rav Nachum may have said this, that, right, Hanan, we agree, outside of Basar B'Chalav, is not Ikar Adin. It's either a Chumrah or a Dirabanan, piece, and it's a Gezerah. Let's put it that way. And Chaticha Riyali Kabed is a Gezerah, and we're not Gozer on a Gezerah. Essentially, I think is really one of the things that's coming out here. It's one Gezerah, it doesn't sit on top of the second, and therefore we don't combine Hanan and Chaticha Riyali Kabed. Basar B'Chalav is different, right? Because the mixture itself is the Isur. And so that's why that has a different status in terms of Hanan. And this concept keeps coming back to us. This is, a constant thing in Isur V'Heter. So, Noam, you look like you had something to say.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way to formulate it without talking about Gezero. It could just be that Hanan is very literal. Like, what does Hanan mean? Okay, it just means that piece has the status of a Nevela, period. And not any of the other accompanying rules. Of course, you would then have to check out every rule that is used in a novella to see if that rule applies. Yeah.
Right. I would say that explicitly doesn't work here. Like, you can't take it literally, because if we really considered this a nevela, like a chaticha that looked like this, that were a nevela, then it would definitely be chaticha or and it would be batel, right?
Yeah.
I guess I just find the Shach's reasoning, and I guess the Shari Dur's reasoning, so deficient.
Yeah, no, it's the Shach's reasoning is a little bit not helpful. Let's put it that way, because the piece itself is Riyali Kaved, and the piece itself is Nevela. It's not the best. I don't know. I think he could have put it better. Let's put it that way. I didn't look in the Shari Dura or the Rashba or the Ran, but people know the Shari Dura, by the way. I don't remember who wrote it. It's from Ashkenaz, and it's like one of these manuals of Isser. It's like just a halachot, like a nice halacha book. From that was very popular because you can read all of Chulin and Avodah Zarah you want. It's not so clear exactly what to do in your kitchen, and so it was a nice guide. But I want to just add that two things from the Ramah. We won't read it inside, but here he says, if you have an unsalted piece of meat, so the blood is still in that, right? That is considered to be asur because of the blood and not asur inherently, not machmat atzma, and therefore that is not riyali kabed. So if you didn't salt meat and then you cook the meat with the blood in it, that blood, that's asur, but it's not riyali kabed. And so I guess if you lost a bloody steak amongst other steaks or something like that, it could be batel. And something that's nesra rakade klipa is batela. So if it's a nice piece of, well, it's not so clear what the case is here, but a nice piece of something that you can serve to your guests. But the isur is only the fine layer around it. that's not considered Chaticha Realit Kabed. So, but there is actually, I believe the Rav Ya disagrees with that, if I remember correctly. But but nonetheless, we don't paskin like him. So, not it's an opinion to remember, but not one that's that important. Okay, so that's bet. Any questions on bet? Okay. Gimel is, I think, one of the most important ones because it's a huge debate between, and we're going to see a mahloket between the Mechaber and the Ramah, which is based on a mahloket between the Rosh and the Rashba. Maybe we'll do, just looking at like what the time is. Someone want to tell me what the difference is between them? The Rashba's opinion, which is the one that's followed by the Shulchan Aruch, versus the Rosh's opinion, which is followed by the Ramah.
It's the question of whether a very big piece of meat constitutes chaticha harueli chabed, where the Rashba says, I actually don't remember which one says which. I think the Rashba says it does. No, the Rashba says it does not, and the Rosh says it does. Good.
So it's like something that is very big, but is not yet ready to be served. I think I'm going to add that qualification that's going to take some work. Right, the Rashba and the Mechaber following him. Right, I'll read actually here. Like he gives the example of a chicken with its feathers, Tarnagolas benosata, right, and it gets mixed up with others. That is batel or batela. Why? Because it takes some work. You have to pluck the chicken, you have to cook it, all that stuff. And in fact, he says, yeah, he says, Ela im ken hi mevushelet, right? It has to already be cooked and ready. V'chein, he talks about also a sheep, right? A full sheep, right? That, or just like a really big piece. Like, I don't know, people eat, I don't know how big, I keep using steak. I think steak's a good example here. Let's say you can eat a 1 pound steak. I don't know if this is true. I don't know how big steak people eat, but you have your steaks are still in 2 pound increments. Nobody serves 2 pound steaks, but people serve 1 pound steaks. That's not Realit Kabed because it's not ready to be actually served in front of somebody, right? Because it says She'ein derech liten lifnei ha'oreach keves shalem or chaticha gedola yoter midai. That's not what we give. We don't serve that to people, right? But he throws it v'yesh kolkim, right? The yesh kolkim is the Rosh and really the Tur in the name of his father. And the Ramah says we follow that opinion, the yesh kolkim, with the exception of a feathered bird, right? That he says that because that's mechuseret maseh gadol, all right? That's that's a lot of work, right? So something that's close to being ready to serve to somebody, that is Realit Kabed, even though it's not ready right now, according to the Ramah. But something that takes a lot of work, that is not Realit Kabed, like a chicken with its feathers, okay? And also like an animal with hair on it and so forth. Then he goes into a whole thing about different legs, of different animals. And actually, I'm going to kind of say we don't need to do that too much because of Daled and the Shach's comment on Daled, if that's okay. So let me just stop there, make sure that Gimel, I'm just looking at the time, Gimel was okay. We have any questions on Gimel?
My other question is how cultural this all is. Like, are we supposed to take this as interpreted for our time, or does this have some objective standard?
You are anticipating what we're going to look at next, which is the Shach in Yud Bet. So, in fact, if you just read the last Shach Sif Katan Yud Bet, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's the last 5 words. After Ad Kan Lashonov, it says V'nireh. Tifa, do you want to read that for us?
Oh yeah, I see. V'nireh dehakol lifnei hazman v'hamakom.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Right. This is dependent on the milieu, shall we say. Where do you live? How do we serve things? And I mean, I was joking before. I don't know if anyone's ever driven like through Texas. There's all these signs of eat like a 5 pound steak, get it for free. In Texas, they serve big steaks. So maybe a bigger steak in Texas is Realit Kabed. I don't know about, are there kosher restaurants? I'm sure there are kosher restaurants in Texas somewhere, that serve steak, right? That's I've never really stopped in Texas, so I couldn't answer these questions. But versus if you really, yeah, go ahead. You have no?
There are. My grandparents live in Texas. There are kosher restaurants.
Okay, great. And do they serve bigger steaks than
their steaks are quite big.
Exactly. So that might have a different rule of what's Realit Kabed. than you do, in, I don't know, California or something like that, where I'm originally from. So, so yeah, so that's a important rule from the Shach there that I think that he's not the only one who says that, but this is a contextual, dependency, and not like Chazal put down rules of the following things are Riyali Kabed and therefore they stick forever, which we have other cases like that, right? Where we say, like with Trefot, maybe to some extent, where like these are the cases that are, where Rav Nachum is, yes, is Rav Nachum, it's nice to have him here. He says, Maseh Gadol, right? Remember the Ramah said that we actually, it's not really kabed if there's a maseh gadol that it takes like a lot of work. That also would be culturally dependent, and what we consider maseh gadol potentially, and also some things just over time. I don't know. This may change everything when machines do a lot of the work for us. I think, right? Do machines pluck feathers from chickens nowadays? Is that the way we do it? So that might change the way things are as well. Yeah, everyone's looking at me. Tikva says yes. Everybody else looks like I'm crazy when I say that. So, okay. So with that, I didn't really. So that's the interesting thing, right? Dalid and also we're gonna. I think it was Chet are really. Questions, Dalid, Hey, and Chet are going to be like specific instances. So I'm actually going to skip those because, well, they're important to learn. I think that they're talking about certain things in certain cultures, like is the kurkavan or other stomach innards. I think kurkavan is that gizzard in English, maybe something like that. I don't know bird parts very well, but are that they're not really kabed. That's also a cultural dependent. Maybe there's some cultures where that is. But Vav is also important, and I wanted to take a look at Vav, and maybe we'll do that outside just based on time. No, actually, let's do the first line. I think that's important. So, someone want to read the beginning of Seif Vav in the Shulchan Aruch? Yavni, was that a hand?
It wasn't, but I can.
Go for it.
הדביריה וחתיכה הראויה להתכבד לא בטלה דווקא בעודם שלמים, אבל אם נחתכו או נתרסקו עד שנאבדה צורתן בטלה. בטלה דתו לא חשיבה, בטלה דתו לא חשיבה.
Stop that. Actually, continue for a second. The two lo chashivi, by the way, they're no longer.
The two lo chashivi, ואפילו אם נתרסקו לאחר שנתערבו עם ההיתר, ואפילו אם
Yeah, so you can stop there, right? So this is if they get cut up, right? If they're not in their whole Ru'ali Kabed state anymore, then they lose that status. There's the same thing with birya, right? Birya loses its status if it's cut up, if it's ground up, right? Nitra sek. And even after, like, even if it happened after, so you mixed a bunch of steaks up that were all riyot likabed, and then you, I don't know, you ground them in a blender to make a small, little, tiny steak mash or something. I don't know. I really should know more about cooking before I do this, but then they can actually be batel at that point.
Right, but just like all other bitul rules, you can't do that l'chachila.
Great, and that's where he goes on, right? If and then we have the rules of, well, what if you did it b'kavana, right? And the Shulchan Aruch says v'hu shenitras hu shelo b'mitkaven, right? Levatel isur, right? And so otherwise the rules of intentional bitul kick in, and they're asur to you or the person you intended to, and so forth. Yes, in Zayin, so I'm just gonna say Zayin outside. Could people have time to go for another couple of minutes since we're, all right, good.
I have to jump off for a meeting, but thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully this was helpful. And usually I'll start on time, so it's my fault this week.
Thank you so much.
But of course, in Zayin, we have Nechtecha Chaticha Chad. This is the question of, well, what if I have a bunch of steaks? One of them was asur, they're riyot likabed, and one of them gets ground up or cut up. Can I say that was the bad steak? And the Shulchan Aruch just simply says no. You can assume that steak that is ground up is now mutar, because if it was from Isur, it's no longer really kabed. If it wasn't from the Isur, it was mutar in the first place. But everything else still follows the rules of like you have a non-batel steak in a bunch of steaks that are not that are mutar, and so everything is asur still. So kind of an interesting. I don't know how often that case happens. And I want to do tet inside because we actually didn't talk about this, I don't think. So someone want to read tet, and then we'll finish there. Noah, maybe you're up. Go for it.
Yeah, I can read. All right. Kor Kivan. Oh, that's sorry. Rosh keves shenimsa trefa v'lo noda me'eza keves hu v'kifo harosh l'tzavaro shalachad me'akfasim v'imseu hachatichot domo mekavanot yafeh yesh lismoch al zeh la'atia achero. So you have the head of a sheep, and then it was found to be a trefa. But you have a bunch of other sheep as well, but you're not exactly sure where which sheep this treifa heading from. So what you're allowed to do is you're sort of allowed to do like a matching game where you try to line up the cut of the head to the sheep. And if you find a match, then the Shulchan Aruch says you can rely on that match.
Exactly. So that's if you and this could be a real thing where a treifa is found when everything's already mixed up and they're riot likaved, and that would be a problem. And so this is a way to fix it. This is in the same way like with birria, you could filter stuff out. Here you can maybe potentially, if you could find that piece, not through some sort of matching game, then you are allowed to remove that one.
Beit Yosef thought this is a thing that happened, which was sort of fun.
That's the thing. I think this is probably happened many times in history. It's finding trefa occurs, and it sometimes gets found after everything, because trefa takes internal knowledge of the body of the animal, and it could be found late in the game, shall we say. So but nowadays, like all of our meat is checked and prepared and so forth, that ahead of time, that we don't deal with chickens with their feathers very often, or but Rav Nachum, yes, only if Rocky, this is relevant only to Ashkenazim. So I don't actually say, Rav Nachum, you want to tell us more about that?
Yeah, just a second. Wait. How do I get unmuted?
We can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me. Sorry. Now I've made the video. So Ashkenazim, if it's cooked, you can't do a matching game with the meat. Which is interesting because the Mechaber already told us that if it's raw, it's not a haticha ruya l'tchabed. So everybody asks on the Mechaber, how could he be talking about this case at all? Because it doesn't make sense for him. It only makes sense for Ashkenazim. So I think here's my simple explanation is that, yes, he's talking for the Ashkenazim. There's not that he knows the Ramah is going to write what he writes, but he copied this case from a case that happened in the Ashkenazi world.
Right. It's also worth saying that he does cite the Rosh. In the previous comment, when he's talking about the Rosh, he says V'yesh Cholkim. So he's talking about the V'yesh Cholkim. So it doesn't even matter Ashkenazim, no Ashkenazim. In his own work, he can refer back.
You're right. Excellent point. Yeah. But I'm just saying he himself would be lenient anyway because this is a case of raw cows.
True.
Meaning it would be batel. It would be.
Yeah, assuming that assuming you paskin per the Rosh and not per the Rashba, which that's an interesting question about the Mechaber in general. Does he? I think he thinks he's writing for the whole world, truth be told. But
that's what Noam is saying. Noam is making an excellent point. Even if he's paskening one way, he is mentioning the other way.
In the same way that he mentions Hanan, he's like, and for those who hold Hanan B'Shar Yisurim, he does it over and over again, right? Even though he himself doesn't hold that.
He's the opposite of the Rambam. He's not trying to squash out the other opinions.
Yeah. So, but
Yeah, right. That was all I wanted to say.
No, great. That's did you have-
One other thing I want to say about the previous halacha, that intending to mevatel means that I'm intending to mevatel for the purpose of avoiding this halacha. In other words, that's where we're punishing. But if you intend to mevatel, not because you're intending to mevatel, but because you're doing an act intentionally, but your goal is not to create bittul, your goal is just to make, I don't know, steak mousse or puree of steak.
You're making steak sauce with real steak.
Exactly. Then you could do it lechatchila.
Mhm.
And that's an example that I heard, or that I was taught 30 years ago, was chickpeas, about birria. If there's a bug, that's a birria. So you're allowed to grind the chickpeas, because even though you know there's a bug there, because you are not trying to get rid of the bug, you're trying to create a hummus.
Yeah. So
So under that rubric, if you are making smoothies, you never have to check bugs. You
Would
can
be correct. I mean, assuming your smoothies are smooth enough. Yeah.
wait. No, like if you want to like a normal smoothie, they're going to be pretty smooth.
Mhm.
Right.
So la halakha, like if you don't need to check vegetables that you're just going to throw into your blender for smoothie.
That would be correct.
that's
I
what
mean,
I learned. Yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
that would be, I mean, the way that this was taught to me in yeshiva was, can we eat at the falafel stand where we know this is what he's doing? You know, is that, I mean, he's doing it for us, right? He's doing it for his clients. So is that called, you know, if you're doing it for someone, it's usher. So in that context where it was a kind of a b'di'evet l'chatchila, in other words, it's already done, and now, but I would say that the logic would dictate that you don't have to check. I mean, yeah, the logic would be that you don't have to check.
It would, you know what, one way we could, it'd be interesting to write. Sometimes I write to like the OU and places like, I'm just like, I have questions for them. I'm just kind of curious about what some of their
I
policies.
once worked as a mashkiach for Chaf K,
Uh-huh.
and I can tell you, and a story was that they said to check, they did something which I think is questionable, really. They said, check 3 cabbages, and if in those 3 cabbages you don't find any bugs, then assume that all the cabbage heads, because it's a tirka gadola, you know, to check all of them. Check 3 cabbage heads in the restaurant, and then you can assume if there's no bugs in them, then all 3 are, then not only all 3 are kosher, but all the cabbages are kosher by chazaka, which is a bit weird because you're making chazaka on a non-occurrence. In other words, on the non-occurrence of bugs, you're making a hazaka, but it's kind of weird. You usually would make a hazaka on an occurrence of a bug, you know. So but that's what they did. And then actually it happened one time that I found a bug in one of them. So now I'm like, oh, so now I don't have the hazaka and the whole thing is ruined. So I called them up, and what did the head mashkiach say?
Check a different cabbage.
Yeah, he said, check a different cabbage.
No.
Which is kind of bizarre.
But that's
because that we're going to make the hazak. It's like what you're not in science, where you choose you throw away data that
it doesn't
fit your paradigm, because you say, well, it's an outlying data. Why? Because my paradigm says it is.
But that's what I learned about Brussels sprouts, was that you check in a package, you check 3 of them, that you rip them apart, and
Right.
But
I mean, the real problem is strawberries, which I've never seen a bug on strawberries, but I've been told that they are there and that they're very hard to see. And I wonder if they're so small that a blender wouldn't blend them. You see, that's the thing.
Well, if you cut the tops off.
I just,
Cut the top off? Are you okay?
oh wait,
the strawberries in Argentina. Hi, this is Marinka, Masha.
yeah.
Strawberries in Argentina, in fact, do have bugs. And the way that it's dealt with there is everything is dipped in vinegar and the bugs fall off before you eat them. And then you check them.
How big are those bugs?
Very small.
Very small. See, that's my thing. I'm thinking that the smoothie might not cut something that small.
Mhm.
And now you're going to say, well, how small is too small? In other words, we don't have to check for microscopic things.
That was the whole thing about the New York water system.
Right. So why would we care about these bugs?
Yeah.
The answer, if you can't see them, the answer is you could see that. The only way they'd be usher is if you took them off and put it on a white piece of paper, and then you could see it. Then it's not called microscopic. even though you can't see it in its current location, but that doesn't mean you can't see it. So that would be a total stricture and then the blending, I think, wouldn't necessarily help. That's why I was hesitant to say you can just throw anything in a blender. Depends on the size of the thing and whether the blender would really get it.
But Reb Nachum, maybe you remember, because I mentioned this last week in the review, and I didn't have a chance to look. I remember the Aruch HaShulchan has some leniency around that, right? For bugs that you can't see easily.
I'm not aware of it. I haven't read all of Aruch HaShulchan, but I'd be curious.
I'll have to go back and look. I seem to recall that he had some
In this Siman?
No, I think he put it's in an earlier one. I think it was like an Ayin Vav or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But where he's talking about bugs in meat there.
Well, that's a different kind of bug. Yeah.
You know what, but I think he mentions in vegetables as well or something. I'll have to look again. It's
okay. Well,
so,
the other rule I can tell you all, the other practical rule, if you're interested in practical rules, is I heard from the Rebbetzin Scheinberg, who was the wife of Rev Scheinberg, who was passed away, but it was a major posek. She said, either it has bugs or it doesn't have bugs, which is the logic, which is similar to the Hazaka idea, which means you look at the celery or broccoli and you see if is it infested or is it not infested. If it's not infested, you just say, well, it's clean. Now, you don't have to start checking looking for that one solitary bug that's hiding behind a flower. That's what she was saying.
So it's a binary.
I'm poskening like her.
All right, but that's all I have for today. So and it's good to have Rav Nachum here. We could get a little help. So it's
I'm glad to help. I'm glad I enjoyed listening.
Yeah. So and next week Kuf Bet Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, and I think I sent out sources to everybody. So hopefully those are helpful.
Great.
And do take a look at the Ran. That's because we're going to think about the Ran Rashi dispute a little bit. So, but
sounds fascinating.
Bruchim to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.